What's going on? Welcome to the First Down Football Show. My name is Andrew Grudinskis,
I'm George Takis.
and today we're going to be breaking down some free agent winners and losers from the first wave of free agency. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
All right. For my first winner, I have the Carolina Panthers. Carolina dished out a lot of money this offseason. We have they gave a ton of money to Jalen Phillips, a ton to Devin Lloyd, paid Rasheed Walker some good money. But the key thing was they filled big holes they had on their defense. Pressure was such a big issue for them last year, and paying 120 mil for Jalen Phillips is really a good thing because there were a lot of premier rushers a lot of teams missed out on. They gave a lot of money to someone who has that upside of being a 13, 13 sack edge rusher. And Devin Lloyd is really going to bring that defense together. Carolina hasn't had a good middle linebacker holding that defense together since Luke Kuechly. Maybe you could say Shaq Thompson, but they haven't really had that. And all these moves pull their defense together and really just help out Bryce Young having a capable defense that can get the stops you need and take a little pressure off that. And other than that, I just I'm not too sure. I give them an A. In all honesty, they had a really good offseason so far. I'd love to see what they're going to do in the draft. Maybe they go after another weapon for Bryce Young, Kenyon Sadiq. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of my winners as well. The winner I have here is the Las Vegas Raiders. I think they jump off the page. Obviously, their offseason has been noted by two major moves: the falling apart of the Max Crosby trade, and then the signing of Tyler Linderbaum. Obviously, that was a lot of money to dish out to a center, 3 years, $81 million, $27 million a year, which resets the center market by over $9 million compared to Creed Humphrey, who was previously the highest paid center. But I look at the under the radar moves that they made. I think of the trade with Teron Johnson right before free agency and right before he was cut by the Buffalo Bills. A seventh round pick swap was huge for the Raiders there, and they get a solid slot corner to fill a role for them on that defense. They bring in the linebacking pair of Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean on relatively fair and good contracts, which I thought Nakobe Dean would get a little bit more money, but I think comparing those two college teammates together creates a really good linebacking core for the Raiders. I look at the re-signing of Malcolm Kuntz, who was productive in the limited amount of snaps he played last year, but now you bring back him, Max Crosby, and you sign Kwity Paye, which is a good rotation of edge rushers to have there. And I think one of the more underrated signings was bringing Jalen Nailor, the receiver from Minnesota. He got, I believe it was 3 years, $33 million, which is a really 3 years, $35 million for an underrated player and a guy that can really blossom in this offense next to Trey Tucker and Brock Bowers with Mendoza coming in. And I think it's overall a really good situation now for Mendoza to come in. So overall, I'm giving it A minus.
I do also like the fact that they retained Eric Stokes. That was honestly their biggest signing, in my opinion, other than Linderbaum, because he had a really good season last year, very underrated. A lot of people didn't see that, but the stats didn't lie. And getting him back was very big. For my next winner of the offseason, I have the Los Angeles Rams. Now, the Rams, they do what they always do, trade away their first, and they got a certified number one cornerback in Trent McDuffie. And the thing with Trent McDuffie is he excels at playing in the slot. You saw him in that Steve Spagnuolo defense go in the slot in blitz. And I just think that defense is going to become a nightmare for anyone who tries to go against it. That front seven has been insane the past 2 years. They drafted late rounds and they really picked some good players who blossomed, like Byron Young. Jared Verse was the one first round pick they've had in how many years? Probably like seven. Goes far back, but they also got Braden Fisk. They got Kobe Turner. They got all these guys who are playing extremely well. The only problem was that backside. And with Trent McDuffie and also getting Jalen Watson, their defense and offense, they are stacked and they have the ability in this draft to not pick for need, but pick for depth and who the best player is available. Another thing I like they did was they brought back Cameron Curl and Tyler Higbee, who were both key contributors on that team. I give them honestly like can't really ask for too much more. I give them an A plus.
Yeah, I would say definitely the Super Bowl favorites right now.
Yeah.
Just no holes on that roster. My second winner is going to be the New York Giants. You look at what they've done since bringing in John Harbaugh, and they lost a couple key guys, Rondell Robinson, Cordell Flott. But when you look at the guys that they brought in, I think they're really really good contracts and B really serviceable players. They didn't go out and spend a ton of money on the top end free agents, but they the signing that really sticks out to me is Tremaine Edmonds, who still has his best football ahead of him, has had a productive career so far, and he came in as the youngest first round pick of all time. He came in the league at 19 years old, so he's a guy that's going to continue to get better, and I believe that his best football is ahead of him. They cut Bobby Okereke, so that definitely fills a role there, bringing in Tremaine Edmonds. I like the Isaiah Likely signing, pairing him with Theo Johnson is kind of what Matt Nagy has been able to do with Kansas City, pairing Kelsey with Noah Gray. So seeing how they're going to run that tight end room will be interesting. I look at the signing of Greg Newsome, who was really promising to start his career with Cleveland for a first round pick. Went to Jacksonville in a midseason trade last year and hasn't really gotten his footing, but under a coach like John Harbaugh, I believe that his best football is ahead of him. I really like the Darnell Mooney signing. I think it's a really good fit. You talk about losing a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, but you bring in kind of the same guy that has the same body type, maybe not as elusive as Wan'Dale Robinson, but you can definitely get good production from Darnell Mooney out of the slot. But I think their best move of the offseason was retaining Jermaine Illuminor. They signed him on a really good deal. It was 3 years, 39 million for a really good right tackle. So you have your tackle situation set now with Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor, and you really set up Jackson Dart for success by bringing in some weapons around him. They still have the fifth overall pick, which they can get a playmaker with. So I really like what the Giants have done so far this offseason. Comes in a little bit lower than what I would grade the Raiders, but I'm going to give it a B plus.
Yeah, all I gotta say for that is get ready for Darnell Mooney to drop a couple, big catches down the
Mm-hmm.
stretch. But my last winner I have is the Houston Texans. Now, last offseason, Houston Texans cleared out that whole entire line. And everyone was like, well, what are they gonna do? They have this whole line, no one's gonna protect Stroud. And exactly what we thought would happen happened. Stroud got battered. Stroud looked terrible out there. And I think the main reason was that O line play. When you don't trust your O line, that shatters everything for a quarterback. And they decided, maybe it is time we invest in the O line. And they got some good players. They got Braden Smith from the Colts. They just signed today Wyatt Teller on a 2-year deal. And they did also retain Trent Brown and Ed Ingram. So that's the main thing for the Texans that they needed to do. You remember that game versus the Patriots? Their defense was lights out. If they had a sliver of offense, they would have won that game, but they didn't. And that the main reason was the O line. And now that they've fixed that and also brought in David Montgomery, who will be such a good bell cow for them, and having Woody Marks as that third down, I personally love Woody Marks and think he's a very good third down back. Having the tandem of both of them really should allow this offense to flourish. And in my opinion, all the talk of CJ Stroud not being a franchise quarterback is complete BS. And this season, they'll see that when he has, an O line made of NFL players and not, D1AA O line. I give them a B plus.
Yeah, I really liked the Braden Smith signing, and prioritizing the offensive line is going to go a long way for them this year. One team that I have as a winner that after the first day of free agency I had kind of as a major loser, but really turned the tides here is the Washington Commanders. Obviously, they paid a lot of money for Odafe Owe, someone who's really had limited production after being a former first round pick for the Baltimore Ravens. He's only reached double digit sacks once in his career, and it was 10 on the dot. Last year, Jesse Minter was able to get some production out of him, but it was really in a rotational role where he was really only on the field to rush the passer in favorable down and distance situations. So paying a guy $25 million a year to be a really three down edge rusher is a little steep. They're banking on upside. But outside of that, you bring in a guy like Leo Chenal who is going to be the leader of this linebacking core now. You have other signings like K'Lavon Chaisson, who really broke out with the Patriots last year, and I think pairing him with Odafe Owe allows the Commanders to really go best player available at pick 7, which they really needed an edge before that, and they still might go edge, but I think it puts them in a favorable position for the draft. I think an underrated move was signing Chig Okonkwo, someone who is a really athletic tight end, pairing him with Jaden Daniels, bringing back Treylon Burks, who was a former first round pick who showed some promise last year, Terry McLaurin. I think this offense could be really good. You bring in a guy like Rashad White as well, who's a veteran back. Nick Cross is a really underrated signing. They brought in a lot of pieces that allows them to return to the team that went to the NFC Championship. Now, I'm not saying they'll go there, but they filled a lot of holes in free agency, and they can really focus on the draft and just go best player available and make this team as good as possible. So for those reasons, I'm going to give them a B plus for an offseason.
So now that we went through our three winners, we're going to head over to the loser side. The first losers I have are the LA Chargers. The Chargers had a ton of money, and they could have gone out, bolstered that O line, signed even Linderbaum, spend some money to really help out Justin Herbert or even help out their defense even more. But they didn't. Tyler Baez, I'm sorry if I butchered the name, was the person they chose to get in Cole Strange. Are you kidding me? Cole Strange, coming from a Pats fan, you do not want Cole Strange starting. On the other side of it, you have Trevor Penning, probably the two biggest jokes of first round picks from the offensive line in a while. And you expect them to play guard, and you didn't touch the receiving core. How long are we going to wait for any of the receivers to step up? How long are we going to wait for Trey Harris to play like a second round pick, or even Lad McConkey to play better than he has been, or the biggest name of all, Quentin Johnston? Like, these guys aren't proven yet, and the Chargers are banking on them proving themselves this year. And it's the same thing with the defensive side. The DBs are right, but they're still waiting for them to develop and hold on. Cam Hart, Tarib Steele, and Dante Jackson are guys who are middle of the pack corners who aren't going to lock down a number one. And their goal right now should be to get to the Super Bowl. You're in the prime of Justin Herbert's career. You have great pieces all around, and they just didn't address the offseason that way. Even the defensive line is in shambles. The interior defensive line, they did retain Khalil Mack, and they probably could have kept Odafe away, but they just decided not to. I don't know if they had a big move plan that didn't go through, but regardless, this was a very lackluster offseason for the Chargers. I'm going to give them a C.
Yeah, they were an interesting team coming into free agency. They were rumored to be in the Tyler Linderbaum sweepstakes, and I mean, obviously the bidding price probably just got too high for them, and understandably so. But they haven't done much of anything. They brought in Charlie Kohler, who's a blocking tight end, and that was really but the length of their free agency so far. So like George mentioned, the window for Justin Herbert's really closing, and they have, I believe, the second or third most cap space in the league right now, and haven't put any of it to use. So I agree with George there. The team that I have as a loser, and not really to fault of their own, but it's the Arizona Cardinals. I really liked the Isaac Sayamalu free agent signing, bringing him from the Steelers, who had a really good year with the Steelers, and they got him on a favorable contract. He was inconsistent in Philly during his tenure there, but bringing him in to fill that guard role is going to be huge for them. But outside of that, they really haven't done much. I do like the Tyler Algier signing. I think he has a lot of upside in that offense and will help out whoever is quarterbacking the Arizona Cardinals next year. Bringing in a guy like Kendrick Bourne didn't make a ton of sense. A guy like Andrew Wingard didn't make a ton of sense. You're getting aging players that don't really fit the timeline and are depth pieces, but you're paying Kendrick Bourne like a guy who's going to be a starter. You lose Kyler Murray after his tenure in Arizona comes to an end. You lose Jalen Thompson, who outside of Buda Baker is one of your better players, and you don't really fill the need with anything. And I really struggled to believe that they weren't in the Malik Willis sweepstakes. I mean, he went for under what was kind of projected for him to go to Miami, and maybe there's a quarterback they like in the draft, and maybe they're waiting till next year. But they didn't get any better, and now with everyone else's moves, they really have the worst roster top to bottom in football, and next year is going to really be a struggle for Mike LaFleur and the Arizona Cardinals. So I'm
Yeah,
giving them a C minus.
so I think they're kind of aiming to, get that tank job for Arch Manning or someone in that class because they did not look like they were trying to be competitive at all and kind of, rolled over to all their divisional rivals. My next loser was the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts were kind of a weird issue. They they re-signed, the biggest free agent, I'd say, Alec Pierce, to a humongous deal and got rid of Michael Pittman. I don't know if you want to do that. My Ideally, if I were the Colts, I would not have tagged Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, I loved Daniel Jones this season. He really proved something that he can be a quarterback in this league. But he tore his Achilles. And you look at other quarterbacks who tear their Achilles and come back, they do not look anything like how they did previously. Kirk Cousins almost ended his career as a starter tearing his Achilles. Aaron Rodgers didn't look too good after that either. And I have a feeling that's what's going to happen with Daniel Jones. Obviously, they have such a strong run game, they won't have to rely on Daniel Jones much, but it's still the fact that they're also relying on Josh Downs to come back from that injury and look very good. Josh Downs is someone who I'm very confident in, but that same thing, he was injured. And the biggest problem of all, in my opinion, they didn't sign they have no linebackers. Their linebacking core is empty right now. And I don't know who they plan on stepping in there for them, but they're going to either have to draft a full class of linebackers, which let me remind you, they don't have their first because they drafted Sauce Gardner or traded for Sauce Gardner
Mm.
and he got injured. And now they're doing whatever they're doing right now. And it's very hard to tell because they're trying to act like contenders with how they're, still holding on to Daniel Jones when the roster doesn't show that. And they're relying on too many pieces to come back from injuries that I just don't see it happening. If I were them, I would have gone for, a less proven quarterback like Malik Willis or gotten a veteran like Gardner Mitch, just someone to compete with Anthony Richardson and, maybe you tank, but then look at the draft class next year. Um, I give them a C.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think they totally botched free agency, and they were actually my biggest loser coming into this
If
because they.
they, or, my
Go
bad, keep
ahead. Go
going.
yeah. Go ahead.
They could have made it right, even with the Alec Pierce deal. If they did that and then trade away Pittman and made the right moves to surround it, I would have been fine. But right now they don't have a third receiver, and they have so many different needs in the draft that they need to address. It doesn't make sense because they don't have their first, and a lot of the this is a deep draft class, but ideally you want your starters to come in day one and two, maybe day two of the draft. But
Yeah, I mean, well, think about it. They're the third highest spending team in free agency. And outside of Alec Pierce and Daniel Jones, you couldn't even tell me who they brought in. They brought in Arden Key, who is okay, serviceable edge rusher, but they didn't get any better. And arguably, they got worse. They lost Braden Smith, who, was he going to be part of the future there? Probably not. But they traded Michael Pittman. They got worse. And Daniel Jones, yes, they were 8-2 last year, but they were on a 3-game losing streak before he tore his Achilles. They were starting to come down to earth as what everyone expected them to be. And I think, they're really going to be in cap trouble for the next couple of years. And I think this will blow up in Chris Ballard's face. And it's going to be a really hard bounce back for the Indianapolis Colts. Another loser that I had, this one maybe not as much as much of a loser, but just really struggled to see some of the reasoning behind their signings. I had the Kansas City Chiefs. I think most of this is because of the guys they lost. They lost Jalen Watson. They traded away Trent McDuffie, their top two corners. And then they lose Brian Cook in free agency. They replace him with Alohi Gilman, who comes in for cheaper and is on a favorable contract, but the difference between Brian Cook and Alohi Gilman are pretty large. And so overall, the secondary takes a huge loss. They lose, Joshua Williams as well. They lose Leo Chenal. They lose a lot of pieces on that defense that made them competitive over the years. And in return, they bring back Travis Kelce on a 1 year, rather expensive deal for a tight end because they had to. And they signed Kenneth Walker to the most money that a free agent running back has ever received, $15 million a year. So really, it just kind of makes me seem like they got worse. Mahomes is going to be coming off a season-ending injury, and you bring back an aging Kelce. The defense gets a lot worse. I know you have pick 9 and pick 30, and those are probably going to be to address the defense, but they didn't have that much money to spend, and they spent it on a running back and a tight end who is not as effective as he once was, and you lose a lot of key pieces. It's really going to be hard for the Chiefs to be able to compete next year, and for that, I'm giving them a C minus of an offseason.
yeah, I completely agree with that. The Chiefs, they were in a tricky situation. Now that they're on the back end of, their Super Bowl run where they had drafted the right pieces, retained the right pieces, well, now it's time you got to pay them. And I understand what they did about getting Trent McDuffie or trading him away while his value was high, but like they're probably going to be on a down year next year. And makes sense because the draft class after this year is insane, but at the same time, rolling over and then trading for Justin Fields to, just throw the ball around, hope for the best. Maybe he can get them in 500 range until Mahomes gets back. I don't know. But for my last loser, I have the Atlanta Falcons. Now, this was another team where you're thinking, what are you doing? They paid so many people last offseason, and a lot of them didn't pan out too well. And now their biggest offseason, acquisition was Tua, who makes sense. Like, you don't want to have to change your offense if one quarterback switches out or, Michael Penix get injured. But I was really hoping for the Falcons to kind of build around Michael Penix and give him a shot. And, like, I know that's crazy to say with all the offensive weapons he has, but give him another year, give him some more help, and really see what his ceiling is, what's his floor. They did tag Pitts, which is good, but I wish they did more. I don't see any of the acquisitions they made being too big, like Jahan Dotson. Are you kidding me? Austin Hooper. They didn't Zakitis. None of these guys are really game changers for them, but they lost Algier, they lost Mooney, they lost David Armagnac, Caden Ellis. Just a lot of key pieces and brought in guys who are really questionable. I give them a C minus D plus.
Yeah, I agree. I know they were tight on cap space kind of coming into the offseason because, as George mentioned, they gave out a lot of money last year. The Tua signing makes sense. You get him on a veteran minimum to come in and compete, and you kind of find out what you got in Michael Penix. And it's a new system for Tua, it's a new environment for Tua, so that could also benefit him as well. But really struggled to get better, and Kevin Stefanski really is going to have to get creative with how these pieces on his team are being used because they didn't get any better and they were a sub 500 team last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back this year. But I agree with George. And for my last loser, before I give it out, I'd like to give an honorable mention to the Broncos who saved themselves today by trading for Jalen Waddle. I think everyone was kind of wondering why they hadn't made any moves other than bringing back J.K. Dobbins and pieces like that because they were really a Bo Nix broken ankle away from potentially going to the Super Bowl and having a shot in that game. And they failed to make any moves to get better in a window where they just got to the AFC Championship game. So I was a little confused by their method, but they kind of saved themselves here by trading for Jalen Waddle. Obviously, you have to give up the first round pick, but at 30, there really wasn't going to be any dynamic playmakers there, especially in a class that's a little bit weaker than we're used to. So you get a guy like Jalen Waddle who would come in and be an instant impact guy next to Cortland Sutton and Mims there, so it makes sense. But for my final loser, I'm going with the Jacksonville Jaguars just because of their complacency. They were a team that really looked good going into the playoffs and really gave Buffalo a run for their money. That defense was really good, and they lost a bunch of key pieces like Devin Lloyd, who is now with the Carolina Panthers, as George mentioned, but they haven't done anything. They brought back Monteric Brown on a good deal, and he's a good player, but they were a team that was really trending in the right direction at the end. You were getting really good play out of Trevor Lawrence. You lost Travis Etienne, who was playing like a really good running back down the stretch of last season and really helping that offense. Obviously, now you have Tootin, who will be a good, it will have a chance to blossom in that offense, but they really haven't done much, and they don't have their first round pick this year because of their acquisition at the trade or the draft last year, trading for Travis Hunter. So his bounce back year will be definitely something to look at. But it feels like the only thing that Jacksonville's been involved in all offseason is Brian Thomas Jr. trade rumors, and none of that has been productive. So they're a big loser for me. They haven't done anything, and they've only gotten worse, and they don't have their first round pick. So for that, I'm going to give it a D minus of an offseason so far for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that the Jaguars should have done more. They should have understand again not re-signing ETN. Like running backs are a dime a dozen. Most fit into a scheme pretty well and can, have some good success if the scheme is good or the O line's good. But I really wanted to see them bring back Devin Lloyd. I understand they have Foye Oluokun, but Devin Lloyd played out of his mind in a contract here, and they should have paid him. But yeah, I agree. They had a very bad offseason.
Oh, and I apologize. It's Travis Achan now.
Oh, yeah, I saw
Yes,
that.
Travis Achan now. So um, that's going to be taking a little bit of time for adjustment, huh? But
Oh, yeah.
Travis Achan, yeah, going to the New Orleans Saints, who I had as an honorable mention as my winners. I thought they had a very good offseason. But those are our winners and losers through the first waves of free agency. Now that free agency is kind of, come and gone for the most part, with a couple other signings trickling in, we're going to be switching to a lot of draft content. over the next month. We're about 5 weeks away from the draft, so look for us to be doing a lot of player evaluations, mock drafts, etc. And draft season is my favorite time of the off season,
Best
so I'm very
season.
excited to get into it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. A lot of mock drafts, a lot of film watching. Keep in tune, guys. We'll get you all the players, draft picks, needs that you could ever want.
Have a good one, and we'll see you in the next one.